There is a specific kind of silence that lives inside a person who has swallowed something unforgivable and decided, for the sake of keeping the peace, to pretend it went down easy. I know that silence intimately. I lived inside it for 11 years. I built my entire adult life around it, around the careful, deliberate act of not saying the thing that needed to be said, not asking the question that had no good answer, not pulling the thread that would unravel everything. I was so good at that silence that people who knew me would have called me easygoing, laid back, the kind of person who doesn't make a big deal out of things. What they didn't know, what I never told anyone, was that the silence wasn't peace. It was a decision. Every single day, a decision to keep carrying something enormously heavy without letting anyone see the weight of it. This is the story of what happened when I finally put it down. I need you to stay with me here, because this isn't a simple story about money. It never was. Money is just the language this particular betrayal chose to speak in. What this story is actually about is the way parents can look at two children they made from the same love, the same home, the same Sunday dinners and family vacations and shared last name, and see two entirely different levels of worth. It's about what that does to a person over time, and it's about what happens years later, when the tables have turned and the phone rings and the voice on the other end needs something. When that person finally decides they are allowed to remember. I was the oldest. My sister Kara was 4 years younger, and from as far back as I can hold a memory, the architecture of our family had a lean to it. Not dramatic. Not the kind of thing a social worker would notice or a teacher would flag. Just a subtle, consistent tilt in her direction. The better bedroom. The later curfew, years before she'd technically earned it. The way my parents' faces changed when she walked into a room. This particular brightening. Like a lamp being turned up that I told myself I was imagining for most of my childhood. Because the alternative was too heavy to carry at 12, 13, 14 years old. I was not an imagining things kind of kid. I was precise, observant. I noticed everything and said almost nothing. Which is perhaps why what happened when I was 17 hit me as hard as it did, because I had already been quietly cataloging the evidence for years. And this was the thing that confirmed all of it. My parents had set up college funds for both of us when we were young. My father worked in insurance. My mother managed the books for a local contracting company. They were not wealthy, but they were careful, and they were proud of being careful. And the college funds were part of that pride. Something they mentioned at family dinners. Something they held up as proof of their planning and their love and their commitment to giving us a future. Both of you are taken care of, my father said more than once. I heard it as a promise. I stored it somewhere foundational in myself, the way children store the things they are told they can rely on. The summer before my senior year, Kara decided she wanted to attend a performing arts intensive, a prestigious, expensive summer program 3 states away that had a reputation for launching serious careers in musical theater. She had been singing since she was small. She was talented. I want to be clear about that because this story isn't about her talent, or even really about her. She was 17 and she wanted something, and my parents wanted to give it to her. None of that is where I placed the wound. The program cost $14,000 for the summer. My parents didn't have $14,000 sitting free and accessible, but they knew where there was money. They didn't ask me. They didn't sit me down. They didn't have a conversation with me in which they looked me in the eye and acknowledged what they were doing and what it meant and what they planned to do about it. What they did was withdraw the money from my college fund, pay for Kara's program, and say nothing until I asked, casually, in the fall, about the logistics of applications, whether I needed to do anything to prepare for accessing the fund. My mother's face did a thing I had never seen it do before. It flickered, just for a moment, and then it went steady again, and she said, "We need to talk to you about that." That phrase, I have never in my life heard that phrase and had what followed be anything other than something I didn't want to hear. They explained it the way people explain things when they've already decided the explanation is sufficient. The program was an opportunity Kara couldn't miss. They would replace the money. They had a plan. They said a concrete plan. They just needed some time. I was smart, they said. I was capable. There were loans, there were scholarships, there was work study. Kara needed this more, right now. Surely I could understand that. Surely I, of all people, could be the mature one. There it is, that phrase that parents deploy like a weapon against the child they've designated as the reliable one, the mature one. The implication being, your sister needs protecting. You don't. Your needs are negotiable. Hers are not. Be bigger than this. Be better. Be quieter. We're counting on you to make this easy. I made it easy. Of course I did. I was 17 years old and I had just had the floor pulled out from under me by the two people whose entire job was to be my floor. And I did what I always did. I swallowed it. I said I understood. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I took out loans. I worked 20 hours a week during my freshman year of college and 25 hours during my sophomore year. I graduated with a degree in accounting and $41,000 in student loan debt that took me 9 years to pay off. 9 years of my adult life shaped by a decision that was made about me without me, in service of someone else's dream. The replacement plan they mentioned? It never materialized. It wasn't discussed again. I didn't bring it up, because bringing it up felt like asking them to admit something they clearly were not prepared to admit. And they didn't bring it up because I understand this now, as a full adult who has done a great deal of thinking about what people are and aren't capable of. Acknowledging it would have required them to sit with what they'd done, and that was more uncomfortable than simply hoping I'd eventually let it go. The remarkable thing, the thing that still catches me sometimes, when I think about it, is how functional we were on the surface. Holidays happened. Phone calls were made. I showed up. I was polite. I loved my parents in the bruised, complicated way you love people who have hurt you and don't know how to say so. I watched Kara's career develop in fits and starts. She did musical theater for a while, regional productions, some touring work, and I felt nothing about it that I'm proud of, so I won't describe it. I tried to be a fair person. I tried to separate her from what my parents chose. I mostly succeeded, but the silence stayed. It lived in me like a stone. The years went by the way years do, fast on the outside, slow on the inside. I built something real, not flashy, not dramatic, but real. I became a CPA. I started my own small firm at 31. I bought a house at 33 with a down payment I had saved aggressively and intentionally. The way you save when you know no one is coming to catch you if you fall. I was methodical. I was careful. I was, in a way, everything my parents always said they believed I could be. I just built it entirely, without the foundation they'd promised. Me and then quietly taken away. Kara had moved back home at 27 after the theater work dried up. She was doing something in marketing now, living 40 minutes from my parents. She was close to them in the day-to-day way I had never managed to be. Partly because of distance and partly because of that old, quiet lean that had never quite been corrected. Then my father had a stroke. He was 68. He survived it, but the recovery was long and the changes were significant. He needed ongoing care, modifications to the house, a different daily structure. My mother, who had never been in robust health herself, could not manage it alone. The cost of professional home care was beyond what their savings, already modest, could sustain for long. They called me. Not Kara, or they called Kara too, I learned later, but the specific call about financial help, the structured ask. The conversation that included numbers and timelines and the word contribution. That call came to me. I think they knew, somewhere in the part of themselves that had always known, I was capable without ever fully crediting it, that I was the one who could actually help. I sat with that phone call for 3 days before I responded. I want to be honest about what those 3 days were like. I am not a vengeful person. I don't say that to make myself sound noble. I say it because I think it's important that you understand the internal landscape I was working with. I didn't want my father to suffer. I didn't want my mother to be overwhelmed and alone. The part of me that loved them, and it existed genuinely, underneath everything, felt the pull of that immediately. I wanted to help. Of course I did. But there was another part. A part that had been silent for 11 years. A part that sat with those 3 days and said, wait, not out of cruelty. Out of something more like, finally this conversation has to happen. Finally the stone has to come out into the light where both of us can see it. I called my mother back on the 4th day. I told her I wanted to help and I meant it. And then I told her I needed to have a conversation first. A real one. The kind we had never had. I told her what I remembered. Not angrily. I had spent 3 days making sure I wouldn't do it angrily, because anger would have let her dismiss it as emotion, as exaggeration, as me being dramatic after all these years. I was calm and I was precise. The way I am precise about numbers, about evidence, about things that matter and need to be gotten right. I told her the amount. I told her what I had taken out in loans as a direct result. I told her the interest I had paid over 9 years. I told her what $41,000 of debt at 22 years old costs a person, not just financially, but in terms of choices not made, risks not taken, years spent in a kind of low-grade financial anxiety that becomes so normal you stop noticing it until it's finally gone. She cried. I had expected that, and I had prepared for it, and I let her cry without rescuing her from it, which was possibly the hardest thing I did in that entire conversation. Every instinct I had said, comfort her, back off, make it easier. The same instincts that had built the silence in the first place. I sat with the discomfort, and I let the words stand. When she could speak, she said, "We always meant to fix it." And I said, "I know, but meaning to and doing it are different things. And I needed you to know that I know the difference, and that I've always known, and that I need you to know it too before we talk about what comes next." She asked me if I was going to help them. There was fear in it, real fear, and I felt it land in my chest the way a real thing lands. I said, "Yes, because that's who I am. But I need you to understand that who I am is something I built myself, without the foundation you promised me. I need you to actually understand that." There was a long silence, and then my mother said something I did not expect. She said, "I think I've known that for a long time. I just didn't know how to say that I was sorry. I want to be careful with what I tell you next, because I don't want to wrap this in a bow it doesn't deserve." My mother's apology was not enormous or elaborate. My father, when he was well enough to have the conversation, gave me something that looked more like acknowledgement than apology. And from him, at 68 and post-stroke, I understood that was probably as close as I was going to get. There was no restoration of the money. There was no dramatic reckoning. The family did not fundamentally transform, but something shifted, something real and structural. The way foundations shift when something heavy is finally removed from one side. The lean, that old, familiar lean in Kara's direction, became visible for the first time. Visible to everyone. When I was the one who showed up with the financial means to help and the emotional complexity to talk about why it was hard, my parents looked at me, maybe for the first time, as someone whose history with them was as real and as significant as Kara's, someone whose quiet had been a choice, not an absence. I helped them. I set up a care arrangement. I contributed financially in a way that was structured and documented, because I had learned up the hard way, over many years, that love without structure is just hope, and hope is not a plan. I was not the martyr. I was not the savior. I was a person who had been hurt, who had built something real anyway, and who was choosing, with open eyes and a cleared throat, to show up for people who had not always shown up for him. That choice was mine. It didn't erase the past, but it let me live in the present without the stone. Here's what I want to leave with you. If you were the capable one, the mature one, the child who was handed the harder road because someone decided you could handle it, I need you to hear this directly. Being able to handle something is not the same as deserving it. Your resilience was not an invitation. Your capability was not consent. And the silence you've been carrying, the careful, daily practice silence, is not peace. It is a weight. And you are allowed to put it down. You are allowed to say what happened, not to burn anything down, not to collect a debt, but because the truth has a right to exist and so do you. And those two things have always been true, even on the days it didn't feel like it. If any piece of this story lives in your chest right now, if you recognize something in it, felt something shift or ache or clarify, I want you to write one word in the comments. Foundation. Just that. I'll know what it means. And so will you. Subscribe if you believe that quiet people have the loudest stories. If you believe that the ones who were overlooked are often the ones who, in the end, had the most to say. Turn on notifications, because the next story is already written and it is going to break something. Open in you in the best possible way. I'll see you there.